Olá, recebam todos e
Hello,
todas as
everybody.
nossas boas-vindas
Welcome,
nesse
welcome,
episódio,
everybody.
nesse novo
Welcome
episódio da
to this
série
new episode
Entrevistas com
of
Personalidades Israelenses.
Interviews with
Este é um
Israeli
programa que é
Personalities.
coorganizado
This is
pelo Centro de Estudos
co-organized
Judaicos da
through the
USP, aqui
Jewish
representado
Studies
na
Center at the
professora
University of São
doutora
Paulo.
Suzana Chwarts,
We have
e
a
também
representative
pelo
from
grupo
that
Bogrei
center,
Chazit,
Dr.
aqui
Suzana Chwarts,
representados nos
someone from the
queridos
Bogrei
Vitor
Chazit Group,
Levitos, e
represented
também
by
Eduardo
Eduardo
Novogrebevski.
Novogrebevski,
Tropecei na
and Victor
palavra,
Luitas.
no
I'm so
nome
sorry if
do
I got
Eduardo.
tripped up on your names,
E a
Eduardo
Academia Judaica, que eu
Novogrebevski,
tenho a honra
and the
de
Jewish
representar
Academy.
aqui, junto
And
com a minha
it is a
equipe
pleasure to
que
talk about the
está
Jewish
aqui
Academy here
participando
with my
da
team,
logística, na
who are all
organização e
here
na
working on the
transmissão.
organization and the
Bom,
logistics and the background.
primeiramente,
So first off,
somente uns esclarecimentos de ordem
just a
técnica.
few
Nós
general
estamos
housekeeping rules.
aqui na sala de Zoom. Quem estiver
We
via
are
sala
in
de Zoom
Zoom.
pode assistir também pelo canal de interpretação,
You can also
se for mais
listen to the
confortável,
interpretation on
tendo
Zoom if
canal de
that's more
inglês e
comfortable to
canal de
you.
português.
You have
E também para as
Portuguese
pessoas que
and
estão
English as your
através
options.
da transmissão, nós
Those
estamos
of you who are
transmitindo pelo
listening
canal do
to
YouTube,
the
o canal da Academia
version on
Judaica e também o
YouTube,
canal
it's
da
just
CIP,
in
e a
Portuguese.
gravação estará disponível também através
The
da
recording
plataforma de
will
streaming
also be
da
available on our
Judaica.
streaming platform
Bom,
for the Jewish
nós
Academy.
nessa ocasião nós já tivemos nos encontros anteriores,
In
nós já
earlier
tivemos
meetings,
como
we've
convidados Daniel
had
Hartmann,
wonderful
Yossi Klein
guests,
Halevi,
Daniel
também
Hartman,
tivemos
Yossi
conosco
Klein
Rachel
Halevi,
Elior, Zeev
Rachel
Begin,
Elior, Zeev Begin,
Hanor Ben Paz e Manuel
Hanoch
Trachtenberg,
Ben-Pazi,
ou
Manuel
seja,
Trachtenberg,
personalidades que já passaram por
wonderful
aqui e
people who have
compartilharam conosco
shared
suas
with us
visões
their
a
views
respeito
on different
de seus
topics
temas,
and different topics related
seus temas
to
específicos.
Israeli and Israeli society.
Eduardo, obrigada.
Thank you, Eduardo.
E a gente sabe que o olhar de cada um não está dissociado da
We know
realidade a
that
qual
each of
estão
them has a very
imersos, e por
particular
isso mesmo para a
view
gente é tão
on this
importante daqui do
very
Brasil a gente
important
poder
reality that they're
ouvir da
living in
parte de
Israel.
quem está em
And so
Israel
that's why
como
we
a
think it's so important to
realidade
hear from the
impacta
people
sobre
in
o seu
Israel
olhar,
how
a sua
reality
perspectiva
affects your
hoje, e amplia o
perspective
nosso olhar.
and how it
Nessa
broadens
ocasião,
our
a gente tem uma
perspective.
convidada muito especial,
We
a
have a very
professora doutora
special
Karma
guest
Ben-Johanan,
today,
que é
Dr. Karma
pesquisadora da
Ben-Johanan.
Faculdade de
She is
Humanidades
a
e professora
researcher at
sênior
the
da Universidade
Humanities
Hebraica de
School of
Jerusalém.
Humanities and
A
senior professor
doutora
at the Hebrew University
Ben-Johanan
in
é
Jerusalem.
autora de
Dr.
vários livros,
Ben-Johanan
e entre
is the
eles
author of a
destaca
number of books, one
renomado,
that is very well
Jacob's
known,
Younger Brother,
Jacob's younger
Christian-Jewish
brother,
Relations After
Christian-Jewish
Vatican
Relations
II.
after the
E
Second
nesse livro
Vatican.
ela aborda a dinâmica da evolução das
And
relações
she
judaico-cristãs, que se
addresses the
torna tocada
dynamics of
pela
Jewish-Christian relationships and the evolution of Jewish-Christian
hoje.
relationships. This is just
A
a
doutora
very high-level
Karma,
understanding of what
vai
she will
ser
talk about today.
entrevistada também
Dr.
por
Karma
duas
Ben-Yohanan will
personalidades
also
do
be
mundo
interviewed
acadêmico
today
brasileiro
by
e
two
judaico aqui no
academics
Brasil.
here in
E
Brazil.
são elas a professora doutora Marta
One
Topel,
is
que é
Dr. Marta
antropóloga,
Topel. She's an
professora de
anthropologist, a
Sociedade
professor
Israelense
of
na Faculdade de
Israeli
Filosofia,
society
Letras e
at
Ciências
the
Humanas da
Philosophy,
USP,
Letters, and
autora
Humanities
de vários
School at the
livros
University of
entre
São
eles
Paulo. She's also the
Ortodoxia
author of a number
Judaica
of
e seus
books,
descendentes,
including
Jerusalém, São
Orthodox
Paulo,
Judaism
Nova
and Descendants,
Judaica em Cena, no
Jerusalem
livro
and
do
São
I,
Paulo, New
e o
Jewish
Sagrado e o Impuro,
Orthodoxy,
Judaísmo, Lei,
and
Comida,
the
Identidade, que foi
Sacred and the
publicado em
Impure in
2022
Judaism.
pela editora Telha.
And this was
E
all
a
published here in
delegada,
Brazil. We also
professora
have with us
doutora
today
Suzana Chwarts, que é
Professor Dr.
arqueóloga,
Suzana Chwarts.
linguista,
She's an
professora
archaeologist
de
and a
estudos
biblical scholar.
interdisciplinares da
She
Bíblia Hebraica
studies
da Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras
interdisciplinary
e Ciências
studies
Humanas
of
da
the Hebrew
USP,
Bible
também
at the
diretora do Centro de Estudos Judaicos da
School of
USP,
Humanities
autora
at
de
the University
livros
of São
com
Paulo.
uma
She also is the
visão
head
da
of the Jewish
fidelidade na
Studies
Bíblia
Center at the
hebraica,
University of São
e
Paulo.
amares
Her books
o
include
texto da
a
Bíblia
view
hebraica, e
of
também o livro
biblical
Rimonim,
Hebrew
Estudos
and
Interdisciplinares da Bíblia,
interdisciplinary
além de toda a
studies of the
produção
Bible.
que elas publicam
They also publish on
cotidianamente.
a regular
Então,
basis
feitas
about
estas
these
distintas
multiple topics related
apresentações
to
a cada
Israel, the
uma, eu
Bible,
passo a palavra à
etc.
professora
And now I'd
Suzana
like to
Chwarts,
hand it over
para que
to Suzana
conduz esse
Schwartz.
diálogo junto com a
Suzana Schwartz
professora
will
Marta
be
Topel.
heading this dialogue today. mediating it together with Dr. Marta Topel. Thank you so much, Kelita.
Boa noite em Israel.
Good afternoon in Israel.
It is a privilege to have you with us. It's a privilege to learn from you about such important issues as we're going to discuss today. First of all, if you allow me, Karma, I am terribly curious about your proper name. I read your name. I said, what a wonderful name. It has to do with interfaith? Yes or no? I don't know. It sounds Buddhist. It sounds traditionally Jewish. Could you please satisfy my curiosity? Sorry for starting such an important interview with such a prosaic question, but...
No, on the contrary. So just allow me first to say thank you very much for extending the invitation. I'm really happy to be with you tonight in Israeli terms, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. It's such a good opportunity also to see new faces and to learn and to meet new people. So that's really wonderful. Okay, so about my name, it's a bit complicated, I guess, to non-Hebrew speakers, but I will try to explain. So as you already mentioned, usually we know the term karma from the Buddhist tradition. And my parents, they read a novel called Shogun. Now there is a Netflix series. But back then it was a novel, a very famous one. And then they encountered there the concept of karma. They were both Israeli secular Jews. And this was the first time they were exposed to this concept, and they liked it a lot. And so they decided that they want to name their first and only daughter with this name, but they thought it was too foreign and too non-Israeli, and therefore they called me Karma with a kaf, not with a K, with a kaf, which is kind of parallel to the C, to the letter C. And it gives the name a different meaning, because karma with a C or with a kaf, karma is kerem, it comes from kerem, vineyard. And so they thought about the vineyard of God. This was the idea behind the name, kerem with a hey in the end, so the vineyard of God. But also with the Buddhist idea. So it was an interfaith concept. But again, I'm mentioning that back then they were both secular Jews, but after that they were divorced, and my father became an Orthodox rabbi, and my mother became kind of a Jubu, so she practiced Buddhism for a very long time. So this really became complicated, and then I married someone. So my last name is Ben-Johanan, which gives it also some kind of a Christian aroma, because Yohanan is also John, so it's of course a Jewish name, but also a Christian name. So I have it all in the name. It's a karmatic name, right? It's my karma eventually. I had no choice but to become a scholar of interfaith relations.
You see, so the Jewish tradition is right when it says the name of a person is the essence of a person and the destiny of a person. You are a case of this affirmation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's a wonderful story. I don't know if the people who are watching us know, but in the days after October 7, Karma, with us, received a letter from Pope Francis. It was all over the internet. It was in Vatican Post, where I read the contents of the letter. And I'm going to quote a part of this letter. He wrote, "My heart is..." No. First of all, he addresses the letter to my Jewish brothers and sisters in Israel. And then he goes on. My heart is close to you, to the Holy Land, to all the peoples who inhabit it, Israeli and Palestinians, and I pray that the desire for peace may prevail in all. I want you to know that you are close to my heart and to the heart of the church. Well, it is very unusual that an academic, a historian, gets a letter from the Pope, first of all. Were you surprised? Did you write him back? What do you think about this letter? What is the relevance of this letter? Does the Pope, in your opinion, only prays for peace, or does he actually do anything else for peace?
Oh, these are many questions. So let's see how I'm going to start. So first of all, well, of course, I was surprised, but it's important to note that a group of Jewish scholars and also activists in Jewish-Christian dialogue formulated a letter 3 months beforehand and sent it out. And this letter was formulated very soon after October 7th. It was sometime in November 2023. And it was signed by something like almost 500 scholars and rabbis and interfaith activists all over the world. So it was really a big initiative. But again, it was an initiative that came, it was a grassroots initiative. It didn't come from any institutional path for Jewish-Christian dialogue. It really came from people who were simply invested in Jewish-Christian relations. And in this sense, you can see it as a response letter to that previous letter. And I was among those who authored the first letter. So this was the reason why I received the letter and not somebody else. But you already mentioned that this letter was really an initiative of Jews from all over the world. It wasn't an Israeli initiative. And indeed, the address to the Israeli Jews was very special. And I think this is even, we may say, historic, because there isn't a parallel. There isn't another document from the Catholic Church that addresses specifically the Jews of Israel. So this is very special in this regard. And it also came in a time, since the Pope's letter came 3 months after our early initiative, and this was already a very charged time. It was already very difficult in terms of the global discourse. And in this sense, it was very important, especially this particular addressing of Israeli Jews. I think it was important. And there are many other things that are very interesting, theologically speaking, and also important in the letter. There is a very nuanced pronunciation there with regards to the fight against anti-Semitism on the one hand, but also against anti-Judaism, which is usually the term that we use to describe Christian antagonism towards Jews and Judaism. And there the Pope affirms the need to address also anti-Judaism. So this sentiment that is actually internal to Christianity and not something that you find outside. So, and I think also the tone was very friendly, and in this time, which friendliness is not exactly the characteristic of this period, this seemed to me very important. Of course, there were things that were more challenging in the letter. For example, Hamas is not mentioned there, and this was very important to many of our the way the conflict is framed is always somehow negotiated between Jewish communities and the church, and we can also see it there. So it is very clear also in the correspondence what are the points that are more difficult in the dialogue. And notwithstanding these difficulties, I think it was a very important initiative and something that the Jewish community in Israel very much was very happy about.
Okay, I will turn to this letter afterwards, but now I will pass the word to Professor Marta Topel. Please, Marta.
Shalom, shalom. Good afternoon to everyone. Boa tarde a todos. I would like to thank the Jewish Academy for this kind invitation to interview Professor Karma Ben-Johanan together with Professor Suzana Chwarts. It's a great honor for me. Very, very unfortunately, I haven't managed to read your book, Christian-Jewish Relations After Vatican II, but I know that it is an extremely relevant text, especially in the times we are living. From the reviews I have read, I understand that beyond analyzing relations between Orthodox Jews and Catholics, you devoted a few pages to analyzing relations between Orthodox rabbis, such as Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, and evangelical groups. Brazil is a major producer and exporter of evangelical denominations. Do you believe that relations between Jews and evangelical can be defined as dialogues? If we take into account the increasing appropriation of Jewish symbols and rituals by different evangelical denominations, such as Messianic Jews, Bnei Noach, and Judaizing evangelicals, what kind of dialogue would this be, considering the doctrine of these groups is based on the premise that after the return of Jesus, the Jews will finally accept him as a Messiah, which would put an end to Jews and Judaism?
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you also. So with your permission, I will connect between the question about the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church, because there is some kind of a tension, which is a little, it might be interesting to explore this tension. Because we see also when we discuss the letter that there is a difficulty within the Catholic Church to deal with the state of Israel and with the Zionism. That is a very controversial topic when we think about Jewish-Catholic relations. However, when we think about Jewish evangelical relations, their Zionism and the state of Israel is very much approved, but there are plenty other difficulties, and you mentioned some of them, that accompany this dialogue. And maybe we can say that also when we look back at Jewish-Christian relations in previous times, that they always exist within a certain tension between a very close affinity, sometimes maybe even too close, at least from a Jewish perspective, because there is so much that is shared. And as you mentioned, this can sometimes cross the boundaries of Jewish identity. But on the other hand, there can be a very strong alienation as well. So it is very hard to find the middle between what we see already in the church fathers, for example, as some kind of a negation of Jews as the negative, the opposite of Christianity. And on the other hand, we also see tendencies to see Judaism as very close to oneself. And I think in terms of the relationship between Jews and evangelicals, this goes much more in this direction, in terms of kind of an over-identification. With regards to the question of dialogue, so interfaith we forgot how difficult interfaith dialogue is. It became such a prominent theme that everybody professed and is happy about, that we forgot that it starts as a difficult initiative. And in the current state of affairs in the world, where everything is very unstable, interfaith dialogue is very difficult again. So of course there are difficulties in the dialogue with groups that formulate their identities differently, and also see Jews and Judaism as part of their own identity while not being Jews. But on the other hand, I mean, this is what dialogue is about. It's about speaking with people that are far away from the way one perceives oneself. And if we want to be able to also clarify and negotiate and even polemicize about these issues, then it will probably be worse. So I'm very much a supporter of dialogue, especially with people that see things profoundly differently. I think this is very important, especially for Jews.
Okay, thank you very much. I am doing a research with Messianic Jews. I am in Argentina, but also here in Brazil, and I was astonished by the different ways they incorporate Jewish rituals and symbols, and they see themselves as spiritual Israel, and we Jews are carnal Israel, but everybody is Israel.
Wow, yeah, so this is very classical also, the big competition and the difficulties between Jews and Christians from at least from the 2nd century, right? From the dialogue with Trypho is exactly when Justin Martyr says that the true Israel is the church, and then the competition over who is really Israel and who is the better Israel as well is accompanying this relationship ever since, and it is always very tormenting. So yeah, I'm kind of sorry to hear that these are still the concepts that we have to deal with, but indeed, as you, I would love to hear more from you about this, because you're surely a better expert than I am about that. But it is disturbing. I can sympathize with that.
Thank you very, very much.
Marta, you may ask your second question.
Okay. Karma, in an article published in Politics and Society magazine in this December 2024, a very touching and sad and challenging one, you criticized the words of Father Newhouse, a friend of yours, about the reason that motivated Israel to counterattack Hamas after the October 7 massacre. How is the Catholic Jewish dialogue developing in these complex days when it is so difficult to explain Israel's position? Do you see a regression in mutual understanding between Catholics and Jews? Are you still friends with Father Newhouse? I ask this last question because I know Jews in the diaspora who have lost friends, psychologists, and even partners after the Israeli-Gaza war. So I'm very interested to hear what is your opinion.
Thank you. These are tough questions. Yes, I think there is a crisis in Jewish-Christian dialogue. I mean, there is no way to shy away from that. That's serious. And as you mentioned, it is hard to explain Israel's actions. Sometimes I understand that some actions are hard to explain, but I was surprised, like many in the Jewish community, of how difficult it is to even understand the very fact that Israel went on a war after what has happened on October 7th. And it seemed to me that parts of the world were somehow went after this fantasy that wars are no longer a part of human life, which is, of course, a very messianic fantasy in a way, and we in Israel experience the fact that this is really it is really a fantasy, and there is no way to avoid violence altogether. But of course, we always have to consider how we can limit and make violence, lessen violence as far as we can. But it seemed to me that this idea, this understanding that violence exists and that one has to protect oneself, this is something that I was surprised to see how absent it was in many intellectual circles, in interfaith circles that I was a member of. And this is definitely what we can also see in this dialogue that I had with Father Neuhaus. So that's tough. I don't think it has changed. I think still, in a way, Israel now symbolizes in the eyes of many in the world some kind of an obstacle to redemption from violence, which is of course, it's very difficult and as an Israeli to experience that. But I know that many in the Jewish community in the world are sharing this experience as well. So this is a controversy that stands between me and between Father Neuhaus. Yes, we are still friends. So on the personal level, we are still in touch and we do many things together. He's coming also to give a talk to my research group actually in 2 weeks. So this definitely exists, but it is also accompanied, it's shadowed by these controversies over Israel, over its legitimacy, which is hard, especially since, many of us are also conflictual in terms of what the government is doing, what it should do. It doesn't matter. There is still a difference between criticizing, but also, legitimizing the state of Israel from the outset, and the very harsh criticism that we often hear that delegitimizes it altogether. I would also like to add that even though David Neuhaus and I did stay friends, I did lose a bunch of other friends who were very close to me before October 7th, and I would mention in particular a very close Palestinian friend that I had when I lived in Berlin. I used to live in Berlin for a while, and she was really my best friend and my neighbor, and my kids were with her kids all the time. And I miss her terribly, but for both of us, it just was too hard after October 7th, because somehow we felt that our closer or our, I don't know, national, or I don't even know how to call it, but the divide was too hard. And this is something that I think about every day, and it's painful every day. But we see how the collective belongings, the national belongings, perhaps also the religious belongings, at least to some extent or to some people, are so strong that they tend to overshadow the individual, the intimate individual connections between individuals. And it is very sad, it's tragic, but it is also a fact, and maybe a fact that we should just acknowledge and see what we can do with it.
Wow. I understand it's very, very difficult, both in Israel and in the diaspora. It's a very difficult position. We Jews from the diaspora who have bonds with Israel, we have to face some problems. May I ask you a question related to this article, a new one? You wrote it in English, and in the article you criticize some Israeli politics. If you had to write this article in Hebrew, it would be the same?
No, absolutely not. It wouldn't have been the same, and it also would. Now I would have written it also differently. So maybe I will explain both. after October 7th, how to say, October 7th came after there was a very big turmoil, political turmoil in Israel, the judicial reform, or however you wanna call it. And many of us, especially in academia, were really in the streets protesting very often. So many were unhappy with the government. And then after October 7th, also being in this situation under a government that is Israel is very divided in terms of its the support that we give to the government. So this played a role, but I didn't understand. I found myself very often as if I am expected to say things against the government and to say, right, the government is terrible and this is not Israel. And I found myself cornered to say these things and to separate somehow between the good Israelis and the bad Israelis. And I no longer want to do that. I want to support my people in general, even if, in terms of the internal discourse in Israel, I know where I stand. But when I speak to the outside world, especially in Jewish-Christian relations, I think this is too much nuance for people in the world to understand. It's so complex. Israeli politics is so complex. Israeli-Arab relations in Israel, it's so complicated that in a way, sometimes I just want to emphasize that there are aspects in what Israel is doing that are understandable. And once you obliterate all kind of violence as something that is from the outset unbearable, then we have a problem, because Israel really does have a problem, and it is in a situation that it is really very hard to solve, and I don't know anybody that has a very good solution to it. So as an Israeli, I kind of accept me being as an Israeli and not trying to make all these separations and depict some of parts of Israel as demonic or satanic. I don't think this is worthwhile. While in Israel, I think it's worth to protest for the values that you cherish. So I hope this answered somehow the question. I think you're muted. Do you want to?
I'm not muted anymore.
Yes, I was muted.
We are
Thank you very much.
An enormous storm here in São Paulo right now. I ask your forgiveness for having my dog Ingale, who is crying and wants to be only in my lap because we have lots of thunders, and Ingale is very spoiled. So Ingale is with us now, okay? Karma, interfaith is not my field, because I am at ease studying the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew and teaching it to whoever wants to learn the Hebrew from the Hebrew Bible, which I consider is a wonderful book, and a universe written in Hebrew by Jews in the land of Israel. Now, this is easy for me nowadays. It has always been easy. But when I hear about the dialogue, I have the impression, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we are always defending ourselves, our identity. It's not that if you have a dialogue with someone, you have to acknowledge someone's existence, someone's identity. Dialogue is a face-to-face interchange of ideas. Now, I have the impression that this is not really happening, because I turn again to the letter you received from the Pope. I'm very glad the Pope didn't write me, huh? I would spoil years and efforts, because the Pope calls us Jews the ancient people of the continent. Okay. Then he calls us one of the inhabitants of the Holy Land. Where does he live? Where is he? In the Middle Ages? We are not one of the inhabitants. We are citizens of the state of Israel. This is not the Holy Land we're talking about. Is the state, just like the Vatican, of the Jewish people. Now, there is not only some religious statements in this, but when I read it, I said, no, it's very easy for people around the world ask for the extermination of the Jewish state, the extermination of the Jewish people. Because when he puts us in this place, you are ancient, I mean, you don't exist, you are not a contemporary people. We are too much contemporary for my taste. We are making the news. And the past is a very dangerous place. It is very dangerous. Now, if you don't have even to read behind the lines to see that these are not religious wording. This is political. This is political. This is very serious. I would say this is, in my view, this is no dialogue at all.
Mm. These are hard questions. I think the question of the political and the religious is something that stands between Jews and Catholics very profoundly since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. Actually, since much longer ago, but in some kind of a new formulation. And I think for the Pope, I mean, I can't read his mind, of course, but for the Church, the way I studied it, they very much attempted to separate between the political and the religious, and to turn to the Jews only as a religious entity in order to avoid the hot potato of the state of Israel, which was already burning after 48, and certainly after 1967, it became something that polarized the entire Christian world, not only the Catholic Church, because then you had some communities that were very supportive and others that really developed a very sharp and harsh antagonism towards Israel. And so there was a problem with the Vatican after October 7th that they felt that they should not respond to what has happened and to also to the crisis in the Jewish world, because this has a political background. It's a political issue. The war is political, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is political, and they attempted to separate it in a way that really left the dialogue kind of emptied, because the whole Jewish world is in a crisis and the church does not respond at all. So it's very interesting to hear you saying that the absence of acknowledging the state of Israel and Jews and Israelis as citizens of a Jewish state, that this is actually a politicization of the dialogue, and not because they intended that this would be a religionization of the dialogue and not getting into political issues. And we experience it exactly the opposite, exactly the other way around. Because the way the Jews define the relationship between the political and the religious is very different than the way the Catholic Church defines it. And in a way, we always had this problem that Christianity set different terms than Jews in terms of how to arrange this complexity of an identity that is both national, ethnic, religious, everything is piled together in ways that it is very hard to separate. So this, I think that we are experiencing a crisis in this regard also in terms of Jewish-Catholic relations. And also, it is interesting because you highlighted something very important when you said the ancient people of the covenant, because indeed, when we look at the last 60 years within Catholicism, there is always this, let's say, this evolution that in the beginning, when they think about Jews, they really think about the Jews of the Old Testament or the Jews of the time of Jesus, the apostles, but not after the crucifixion. So the post-Christum Jews are really not, they're never considered. But after a while, especially under John Paul II, this changes, and there is much more acknowledgement of contemporary Jews or of the ways the Jews interpret their own history. Also, even an acknowledgement that indeed Jews have some kind of an attachment to the land of Israel. And this has a religious aspect that cannot be denied because this is something very ancient that goes with Judaism throughout history. So we see this, there is actually an intra-Catholic controversy over these issues that, and some tend towards this direction, some to the other direction. And indeed, this would be, now when we face the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate and of the Second Vatican Council, it would be very interesting to analyze whether, in a sense, there is a kind of a retreat to previous times and to previous perceptions of previous Catholic or Christian perceptions of Jews and Judaism that deny some kind of a value to the contemporary forms of Jewish life. But I would just like to say one more thing, and this is that indeed the church has and already had in the time of the Second Vatican Council, it really has believers from all over the world. And this Pope is, as you know, better than I do, has the sentiments that are more prevalent in the global South and that are much less invested in the historical consciousness of the Holocaust, this memory of the Holocaust that was very prominent in the West. And somehow this also plays a role in terms of the place that Jews and Judaism receive within his pontificate. So in this sense, this is part of the complexity, I think.
Okay. Who are your students, Karma? Who come to study interfaith with you at the Hebrew University?
So, first of all, everyone. So there are really many. It's diverse. But I'm especially surprised. I think there is now a wave of Jewish Orthodox interest in these issues. Something that was not there 10 years ago. It's really a new thing. So I have many Orthodox students that are very interested in theology and in religious ideas and in contemporary religion, and they are very engaged. So it's interesting for them, not only in terms of the academic and the intellectual, on the intellectual level, but also there is a lot of existential energy invested there. But I think what is most interesting in my students in the Hebrew, the community of the Hebrew University is that you have secular Jews and you have religious Jews, and they have different political opinions, and they all come to these questions, and then you see, how complicated they really are because of all these diverse perspectives. So I'm really keen on this setting. I love teaching there.
Wonderful. So you live and you teach in Jerusalem. We don't have time. I'm getting the taste of talking to you, but I have to make a last question. would you take us with you in a stroll around Jerusalem, outside the walls of the Hebrew University, the protection of the academy, and through the walls of the old city where we have all the tribes there. We have Jacob, we have Esau, we have Ishmael. What do you see there, Karma? Is there a gap between what you see and what you teach? Is there a way to reconciliation and respect? Is there conflict? Is religion a force that can pave the path to peace? Can we believe in that in practical life?
First of all, this is, of course, it's a time of crisis. So there's no way to circumvent that. And there are tensions between the three Abrahamic communities, we may call them this way. And it's present, and it's very hard to ignore. That's one aspect of the situation, and it's very prominent. But on the other hand, if we do not expect exactly things to behave the way we think about interfaith relations, the liberal setting that we are used to when we look at faith communities, and we just see what is happening on the ground, we see that there are all kinds of relationships that are evolving, all kinds of negotiations, both controversies and friendships, and sometimes they have political alliances, and sometimes they are much more theological and religious and spiritual. So there is everything in Jerusalem. There is really everything. And also religions experience themselves in a very rich way. So it is very hard to reduce each of these religions to kind of one aspect, the radical aspect, for example, because you have everything. And once you have radicalization somewhere, there is also a reaction that it is trying to do things differently. So I would say today, the conflict is being religionized and theologized in many ways. And this is not true only for Judaism, it is certainly true for Islam, but also for Christianity. We often see how Christians also theologize the conflict and use Christian terms in order to understand it, and it's not always helpful. Let's put it this way. But on the other hand, first of all, we know from history that it's not that secularism does not use violence and does not justify violence, and sometimes in a much more horrific way than how religions do that. And maybe if we stop assuming that religion is what produces the problem, but somehow acknowledge religion as a factor that from now on we have to face it. It's part of the deal. It's part of the relationship on the ground, and it is diversified enough to pull the right strings from it that can also be conciliatory and open up new paths for peace that perhaps are not the path that we used to seek, or those that come from, the more political apparatus and the way we activate it. So if we allow religion to be creative, I am sure that we can also explore its beneficial parts and its peaceful parts, those that really can pave new paths. So I'm optimistic about religion. I'm not sure about the conflict, but this we'll have to see.
Amen. Amen to all your words. Marta, would you like to ask, we have a few minutes left. You would like to say anything?
Okay. Who is the motor of the initiative to have a dialogue with the other part. Because when I did research with Orthodox Jews in Israel, I learned from them that all Gentiles are another, we don't have to think about them. These are the Askanim, the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox elite. So you said that part of your students are from an Orthodox sector, so I am very interested to know that.
Yeah, so first of all, of course, it was the Christian community that initiated the dialogue, not only with the Jews, but the whole issue of interreligious dialogue was, in the beginning at least, a Christian initiative, and it's only gradually that we see other communities trying to translate the concept of dialogue to their own terms, which is very hard sometimes. And we already, by saying that, we see how much politics and power relations are involved in this project of interfaith relations from the outset. And indeed, as you mentioned, there still is a lot of suspicion, especially from Orthodox Jewish communities, but not only. There is a very hard history, difficult history between Jews and Christians. So it's not surprising that not all the Jews have jumped on the wagon immediately. But I think there is clearly a younger generation now that that changes things and that is very interested in Jewish-Christian dialogue. In fact, it's a bit tragic because it's really in the minute where the moment when Christian communities kind of loosen and are no longer so energetic in terms of Jewish-Christian dialogue, that we see these Jewish communities that are now much more eager to engage in dialogue with Christians. So I think there is really a transition here. It has been a very Christian initiative, and many Jews were very reluctant to go ahead with it. And now, in a way, I think it's becoming the other way around, that Christians are much more invested in Christian-Muslim dialogue these days, and we see it in many communities, while many more Jews are becoming interested in the relationship with Christianity and with Christians, especially in the theological aspect of the relationship, which is really a novelty. So I don't know if it's optimistic, because it's both, right? It's both pessimistic and optimistic, but there is definitely a change, and a very interesting one that I'm very happy to accompany.
Wonderful. Karma, thank you so very much for being with us. Such a privilege. Thank you. Obrigada a todos que ouviu. Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you. I hope we have more chances in the future.
Definitely, definitely. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good Sunday. Yom Rishon Tov. Toda Karma, toda Marta. Ciao.
Thank you for you all, the three scholars. Cadê vocês três? Ingale!